So, you want to save the world with clean energy? Make money doing it? Confused about the economic and technical realities of residential and commercial solar, batteries, heat pumps, EVs? Want the real-world scoop on new energy technologies, not manufacturer hype? Then tune in to the Weekly Energy Show, hosted by Barry Cinnamon. Insights from Barry's 40-plus years in the solar and energy industry will help you understand the future ways we'll generate and consume energy. And now, here's Barry.
Welcome to this week's Energy Show. Today we're going to be talking about light bulbs. Yes, I know it's boring, but there's a lot of innovations going on in the lighting industry, and these are things that are going to impact you directly. When we install solar at Cinnamon Solar, we also encourage our customers to find ways to reduce their electric bills. And almost without question, one of the easiest ways to do that is to look at the lighting that you have in your home or in your business, because the new technology out there, mostly LEDs, but even old CFLs, really could have an impact. So today we're going to go take a look at all the options you have for lighting. Now, you're all aware of LED light bulbs, and if you looked into putting LEDs in 2 years ago, 5 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago when they started coming out, your impression was, boy, these things are really expensive. I'm not going to spend $25 for a light bulb when I can get one for $1.99. But what's happened over the past 5 years is the prices have really come down pretty dramatically. And now if you go into one of these big box retailers, the first aisle you hit is this huge light bulb aisle. They used to just have a couple of shelves, but now it's a whole aisle. And the reason is prices are way down and LEDs have become popular, and it's mostly an economic reason. So, what I've been doing over the past few years is I've always been shopping, keeping an eye on things. And it used to be a few years ago, I would put some of these cool new LED light bulbs in my shopping cart and then would look at it and say, holy cow, I'm not going to spend $20 for a light bulb. But now the prices have come down to, sometimes as low as about $5 for a bulb. And it's going to make some sense for you. So what I did recently is I bought a complete selection of light bulbs at my local hardware store, and then really went in and started crunching the numbers. And on my dining room table, I had a whole selection of light bulbs. My wife looked at me like I was a complete nutcase, and I can see the wheels turning in her head that she married a nerd, but that's just what she's got to deal with. But there are some pretty amazing changes. So we're going to do a whole show today on light bulbs. And so I hope you're sitting down and you're able to contain your excitement here. So what I was able to find this time was 5 different kinds of bulbs along with of LED bulbs. Just a few years ago, you could only get them in a couple of different shapes, but now they're pretty much covering the gamut of every kind of light bulb that you use in the house. And so we've got 60 and 100-watt light bulbs. These are the regular incandescents that you screw in. And we've got a selection there. We've got track lighting bulbs, flush mount ceiling bulbs. These are sometimes called hi-hats, candelabra bulbs, and then even 3-way bulbs. Now, one of the things that you have to remember when you're looking at changing out your lighting is that a lot of these newer technologies, whether it's CFLs, compact fluorescents, those are the little curly Qs, serpent-like things, or LEDs, they may not have the yellowish, warmish colors that you're used to with incandescents. But then some of the LEDs actually do have really good colors. And this is something called color temperature. The higher the color temperature, sometimes it's measured in degrees, 4,000, 5,000 degrees, the bluer the lights look. And then the lower the color temperature, the more orange and red and yellowish they look like, and those typically are going to work better for a lot of the applications in your home. So you want to check into that, and there's some color temperature information on the boxes, but in the most cases, you can put them in and see what you really like, and that's what we do around home. So in terms of the characteristics of these bulbs, we're very used to incandescent lighting where you would just flip the switch on, they'd instantly go on, and if it was on a dimmer, all incandescents would dim. That dimmer would lower the frequency that's going into the bulb, and it would actually dim, and you can dim it until it almost goes completely off. CFLs, those compact fluorescents, they usually don't dim at all. You'd kind of turn it down, and the dimmer would start making this little buzzing sound, and then suddenly they would go out. And the early LEDs had some of the same problems where they either wouldn't dim at all, or they would dim down maybe halfway and then they would kind of shut off. But the electronics in the LEDs has gotten a lot better, and now they pretty much dim pretty similar to incandescent bulbs, and you can also get some with good color temperatures. Now, another important feature about these bulbs is the lifespan of the bulbs. And, we're looking at huge ranges here. Typically, these incandescent bulbs are going to last for a few years. And what's kind of strange is every single LED bulb all says that they last for 22 years or 22.8 years. I don't know how they get that precise, but the LED pretty much never burns out. It's the electronics in the base of the bulb that could eventually burn out. So I'm going to kind of take their word for it as far as these lifespans. And when you look at the lifespan of CFLs, I used to think that they would last a long time, but then I noticed in a lot of cases they wouldn't last much longer than an incandescent bulb. And then I started writing down the data that I put the bulb in. I found out that a lot of these CFLs would only last 2 or 3 years before they'd conk out. So what out of this collection of light bulbs we have here, they're almost all made in China, and that was kind of a surprise to me. They make a lot of light bulbs. There's probably whole cities in China making light bulbs for the world. There's no light bulb industry anymore in the U.S., even though this is what we started. This is what Edison started and GE started and things like that. No one's really thought about putting tariffs on light bulbs, but almost all these bulbs are made in China, but there are some bulbs made by Philips in Mexico, so that's a little bit closer. So when we look at how important this lighting thing is, residential lighting accounts for about 10% of the total electricity that's used on a national basis. Here in California, it was like 22%. So I guess we're burning the midnight oil. But when you add this all up, it becomes pretty substantial. So you should look at lighting if you haven't already done so. And if you switched out a lot of your incandescent bulbs to CFLs, now it's time to start looking at replacing those with LEDs, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So here's the different selections that I have. We've got ordinary screw-in fixtures, and these are your old-fashioned bulbs, like the old-fashioned Edison bulb. We've got track mount lighting to take a look at. We've got the spots and the floods. We've got candelabras, and these are those little candle-type bulbs, usually with a smaller base, and you have those in your dining room or your kitchen. And then we also have three-way bulbs, and it's really cool that LEDs now fit into every one of these market segments. And what I found, at least in our house and in many of the houses that we're doing solar on, people kind of forget about the candelabras that they have, the fixtures in the kitchens or the dining rooms. And those things are on a lot. And those little candelabra bulbs are 40 watts, so they use a lot of juice. And the LEDs are a great solution for that. The other thing that I'm really, really happy about is they now have LED three-way bulbs. Just even a year ago, those didn't exist. But now you can buy three-way LEDs that put out either 50, 75, and 100 watts, depending on how you have your light fixture set. And these LEDs last a long time, and especially in three-way bulbs that I would always, maybe the highest setting would work and the medium setting would conk out, or the low setting would conk out, and you'd end up with something that would just be one setting. But my experience so far with the three-ways is they're really good, and that's something I would recommend, even though they're a little bit on the pricey side. But we'll get the economics, and you'll see it makes a lot of sense. So let's just briefly talk about the different technologies. You've got the original light bulb, which is called an Edison bulb, and you can't buy them anymore. Basically, this is a tungsten filament in a glass enclosure. There's a vacuum, and the vacuum's there so that they don't, that the tungsten filament isn't consumed. And these things have been out for over 100 years. When I was a kid, we used to go door to door, house to house in the Boy Scouts and sell light bulbs because they would always burn out and people would always need them. But you know what? You can't buy them anymore. The only thing you can get are these expensive antique-looking light bulbs that probably are pretty similar to what Thomas Edison had in Menlo Park in New Jersey in the late 1800s. And they're real expensive, and it's really just purely decorative. All of these ordinary incandescents have now been replaced with something called incandescent bulbs, but they have a little halogen insert. So there's a bulb within a bulb. And the Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007 basically required the lighting industry to get rid of the ordinary Edison bulbs and come out with something more efficient. So now, if you want to get an ordinary screw-in light bulb, it's really a miniature halogen bulb inside a glass enclosure. The next innovation was CFLs. They started coming out about 20 years ago, and over the last 10 years, they've been really, really inexpensive. And CFL is a TLA, a three-letter acronym for compact fluorescent lighting. Originally, they started out as these little spiral snake-like things, and it's basically a fluorescent tube. And now many of them have more of an incandescent globe around them, so you don't see that spiral in there. And they have a little transformer in the base. You screw them in and they work. They're pretty good. But as I mentioned, I found that they tend to burn out faster than you'd expect. And as I mentioned, the latest generation are LEDs, or light-emitting diode bulbs. Now, there's a little LED or multiple LEDs in the top, and then in the socket of the bulb that you screw in, there's some electronics. Some of these have weird shapes because they have to dissipate the heat. Some of them may have a yellow color on them, but surprisingly, that yellow never turns yellow. It actually just makes the light a little bit warmer. And actually, I find that the ones that have those little yellow sections on the inside are the ones that give you the best lighting for the house. All right, so here's what we did. Got all these light bulbs, and then what I wanted to do is compare these light bulbs on three different dimensions. I wanted to look at what the cost was initially. I wanted to look at the lifetime of the bulbs, and then I wanted to look at what the total cost would be over 5 years, and kind of created a big spreadsheet. And in this big spreadsheet, we looked at every different kind of bulbs that were commercially available now, looked at the standard retail price, and basing it on a 25 cent per kilowatt hour electric rate, which is kind of the middle tier right now in California. We looked at what you would save over 5 years. Obviously, if you're in an area where the electric rates are lower, these numbers are going to be a little different. But I did a sensitivity analysis, and it doesn't make a really big difference. And what was really surprising to me is the conclusions, which we'll get to in a minute. So here's what I learned, and I'm just kind of stepping through these things. And we looked at the standard 60-watt screw-in fixtures. And this is probably the most common light bulb in the U.S. We looked at a vintage Edison bulb. We looked at an ordinary bulb, which is what they now call an incandescent bulb. It's even though it says 60 watts, it only uses 43 watts. And then we looked at these CFLs in a round globe. So this is a 60-watt bulb, but instead of 60 watts, and when we talk about the 60-watt output, that's compared to an ordinary incandescent bulb. So that 60-watt incandescent uses 60. The 60-watt new incandescent uses 43 watts. The 60-watt CFL uses only 14 watts. And then you've got a 60-watt LED that only uses 9 watts. And we kind of crunched through the numbers, and we looked at the different lifetimes of the bulbs. And so when we talk about those lifetimes, the vintage Edison bulb has a lifetime of 1,500 hours. So it would just run constantly for 1,500 hours, and there'd be a duty cycle there, assuming that you're going to turn it on and off and run it 3 hours a day. But it worked out to be 1,500 hours, and that's the information on the box. The ordinary bulb, this is the replacement to the Edison bulb. This is what our government wants us to buy, has a lifespan of 986 hours. The CFL has a lifespan of 9,900 hours, so that's a long time. It says 9.1 years if it's 3 hours a day. And the LED has a lifespan of 25,000 hours, or 22.8 years. Now, as I mentioned, you may get different lifespans, but this is what's on the box. This is what the manufacturers represent. So that was kind of interesting. And there's also a little bit of a difference in the light output. What's surprising maybe not that surprising, the lighting output of the ordinary Edison bulb was lower than the lighting output of the LEDs. So when we kind of crunched through these numbers and we looked at this 25 cent a kilowatt hour electric rate and we looked at the lifespan of the bulbs, your total cost to run these light bulbs for 5 years varies dramatically. So if you just use the ordinary old-fashioned vintage Edison bulb, it would cost you $115 over 5 years. If you switched to the newfangled government-required incandescents, these are the higher efficiency incandescents, your costs over 5 years would be about $66. So that's a pretty good improvement. So, and then the next thing, and this is what people have been doing over the past 10 years or so, is switching to CFLs. If you look at the total operating cost over 5 years for a CFL, $24. And that's why people have been switching to CFLs. You go buy a 10-pack at the big box store and you just take out all the regular light bulbs and you put the CFLs in. That's pretty good. But here's what changed. The pricing of the LEDs has been coming down constantly very quickly. Now, if I look at the 5-year costs, and this is including the replacement of the bulbs for the LEDs, it's $23. So the 60-watt LED is the cheapest bulb to get, surprisingly. And I'm not talking about really cheap bulbs. You can probably buy even less expensive versions. But that was a surprise. So for me, I'm no longer going to be buying CFLs. So now let's look at another size bulb. Sometimes in an area, like in an office, you want something that's really bright. You want to get a 100-watt bulb. That was the standard for years and years. You'd have that 100-watt incandescent bulb. A 100-watt incandescent is going to cost about $109 over 5 years. That's to replace the bulb when it wears out, and that's also the electric operating costs over the time frame. A 100-watt CFL is going to cost $41, so less than half the price. And these are also new. A 100-watt LED is going to only cost $48. Now, just a year ago, I couldn't even buy a 100-watt LED bulb, and now they've got 100-watt LED bulbs that have an operating cost of $48. Now, you got to bite the bullet, and just, this is where you have shopping cart shock when you're in the store. But the ordinary bulb costs $2, the CFL costs $5, and the LED costs $22. But the LED turns out to be one of the best options. And it's slightly more money than the CFL, but it's going to last a lot longer. So once again, I'd say just for a few more dollars, I'd go with the LED. And you got to remember, going forward, the pricing of the LEDs is only going to come down more and more. And we're probably about as low as we're going to get on the regular light bulbs, just because we're manufacturing them by the billions. And we're about as low as we're going to get on CFLs. So we talked about the two ordinary screw-in fixture types of bulbs, 60 and 100-watt bulbs. Now let's look at something that's a little bit more specialized. You've got these track mount bulbs, and the track mount bulbs have historically been usually halogen bulbs. So if you were, and I hate these things because they would always burn out, and you'd have to climb up on a ladder to go fix them. So a halogen track mount bulb will cost you about $3.50, and it has a total operating cost over 5 years of $78. Whereas a track mount LED, and they've got these now, is, although the thing's going to cost you $19, it's going to last really long, and your operating costs over 5 years are going to be $27. So that's like really, really good. And for these track mounts, and also for the flush mount, these can bulbs, you got to climb up pretty high to do it. And I figured, if I'm going to climb up on a chair or a ladder, and I'm somebody that climbs up on a ladder for a living, I'm going to put something up there that I don't have to mess with again for a long, long time. So the LEDs are good. Now, when we look at these flush mount bulbs, and there's usually either spotlights or floodlights, and these are sometimes called PAR 20 bulbs. The incandescent flood is going to cost about $8. And these are pretty good bulbs. They screw in. But your operating costs, including replacement, are going to be $108 over 5 years. They have LED indoor spots and floods that are going to cost you a lot of money, $21 again. But here's the great thing. Over 5 years, the operating costs are only going to be $27 because they're going to last for almost 23 years and they only use 4.5 watts of power to put out about the same amount of light as a 50-watt halogen or incandescent indoor flood. So these things are dying in my house all the time, and I just have I've got a box of the LEDs, and once I found the LEDs for which I like the right color temperature, it's just a no-brainer to replace them. And they do kind of look almost exactly same as the old-fashioned incandescent indoor floods, and these LEDs also dim pretty nicely. So the other thing that's nice is that they now have LEDs for candelabra fixtures. And you might think, oh, gee, I don't use these very much in the dining room. A lot of times I eat in the kitchen. But when I'm selling solar at people's houses, very, very often in the kitchen or in the dining room, they have these candelabra fixtures. And these are the bulbs that have the little screw-in base. It's not the medium screw-in base. It's a smaller screw-in base. And the ordinary candelabra light bulb only costs like $1.37, but they use 40 watts. Well, the 5-year operating cost for that bulb is $57. Why? Because they only last about 3,000 hours. So you're gonna be replacing those things pretty often. They have CFLs for candelabras. And there's that little spiral thing inside a little tiny glass globe. That's going to give you an operating cost of about $14, so way cheaper than the ordinary bulbs. But the cool thing is they've got LEDs that are dimmable, and they look pretty good. And when I'm saying they look pretty good, the color temperature is pretty good. The operating cost is only $17, and the LEDs are also dimmable. So that's another kind of no-brainer. I really like that solution. And then the final kind of bulb that we're looking at, and also once again brand new, I couldn't even get them a year ago, but now they have them, are three-way bulbs. So an ordinary incandescent three-way bulb with 50, 100, and 150 watts is going to cost you $4.50, but that operating cost is going to be $157 over 5 years. Whereas if you were to get the newer LED three-way bulbs, 40, 60, and 100 watts, with about the same number of lumens, only $47. And also, as I mentioned, it's great because those LEDs, they don't burn out. Your medium brightness bulb is still going to be there. So really, really big improvements, and I'm very, very happy to see that the LEDs are out there. And here's my recommendation for you is pretty much don't buy any more incandescents, don't buy any more CFLs unless it's a bulb that's hardly ever on, like maybe, I don't even know, a closet that you never open, just ignore that one. It's time to kind of completely transition over to LEDs. There's no doubt in my mind over the next 10 years or so that we're going to completely transition to LED bulbs just because the economics are so much better. Well, that's all the time we've got in this week's Energy Show. Thanks to all of our listeners for joining us today. And if you missed any of today's show, you can always go to our website at cinnamonsolar.com and listen to the podcasts.
So, you want to save the world with clean energy? Make money doing it? Confused about the economic and technical realities of residential and commercial solar, batteries, heat pumps, EVs? Want the real-world scoop on new energy technologies, not manufacturer hype? Then tune in to the Weekly Energy Show, hosted by Barry Cinnamon. Insights from Barry's 40-plus years in the solar and energy industry will help you understand the future ways we'll generate and consume energy. And now, here's Barry.